CSS hover cards offer great space-saving functionality and can greatly enhance user experience. They're also incredibly easy to create and require just one line of CSS code to get them up and running. They're mobile-friendly and can accept all the bells and whistles that CSS has to offer, using plain and familiar properties. We can build a hover card in just 3 simple steps. So, let's get started. Let's begin by creating a class called container. We'll give it a position of relative, display block, and for this example, a basic width and height of 320 pixels. We'll give it a black background and set the margins to 120 pixels and auto. So there's the container that will show additional content when we hover over it. To make things a little clearer, let's give our holding container an image for its background. And that's step 1 done. In step 2, we'll build a div that appears and disappears on hover. Let's call the class hoverDiv, give it a position of relative, and display to block. Set the width and height to 100% so it fills the entire space of the holding container. Let's give it a slightly transparent black background and set the text color to white. Now, let's add our hoverDiv within our container div. And there you can also see our hoverDiv. Let's add some text as well, although you can add anything from forms to videos. Let's also give it some padding and set the box sizing to border box so there's no leakage. Great. Now for the fun bit. Give your hoverDiv an opacity property and set the value to 1 for full visibility. Notice, if we reduce the opacity value, the hoverDiv appears to fade out. Let's control this opacity with a hover element in step 3. So finally, in step 3, simply give our container div a hover pseudo class. Then, target the hoverDiv as such and set opacity to 1. This means that whenever we mouse over the container div, the hoverDiv's opacity will change from 0 to 1, and when we mouse out, the opacity shifts back to 0. It's really that simple. Let's make a hover effect smoother with a transition for both the container and the hoverDivs. And we're done. Let's now look more closely at what's going on. The container and hoverDiv are 2 separate items. We can better see this distinction if we give our container div rounded corners. Notice how only the container div has a border radius? This means we can style each div individually, then use the containing element to target its inner nested elements. Note that CSS makes it easy to target children of a parent element, and that's exactly what's happening here. So we have a holding container, and we have a div that shows on hover. We place the hoverDiv into the holding container and reduce its opacity. Then, we take the holding container and give it a pseudo class and target the internal hoverDiv's opacity value. Note that you can target any of the hoverDiv's properties, including display, height, etc. I've chosen opacity because A, it can be animated since it has a numeric value, and B, search engines can still see the content when your page loads. To make hover work on touch devices, also add the active pseudo class to your code. For an even cooler looking hover effect, let's use transition delay and scale. If we want the hoverDiv to appear slightly later, give it a transition delay. If we set the delay to 1 second, the hoverDiv appears a second after a user hovers over the container div. Let's set the delay to a more reasonable 0.3 seconds. By the way, here's the shorthand for the transition's delay value. Likewise, to have the container scale on hover, first set the transform scale on the container div to 1. Then, once again, target just the container with its hover pseudo class, and set the scale to 1.03 for a subtle but visible zoom. As you can see, we're using very simple and robust CSS to create a nifty user experience. The code snippet is in the comments, and if you have any questions, please ask. Thanks for watching, and CSS you next time.